Seahawks fans, wherever you may be. Welcome back for another edition of the Seahawks Playbook podcast. Join your host, Bill Alvstad, and co-host, sports writer and football analyst Keith Myers as we talk Seahawks football. Hey, Seahawks fans, welcome back to another episode of the Seahawks Playbook podcast. I'm your host, Bill Alvstad, sitting down with co-host Keith Myers here to talk Seahawks football. Today, we're going to be talking about the 5th overall pick in the 2023 NFL Draft coming up in less than 2 weeks. The question is, what does Seattle do at pick number 5? There are all sorts of options. There are a short list of players that everyone thinks that Seattle is attached to as far as being possibilities. Could it go that way? Are there any surprises? Could Seattle move up? Is it likely we move back if certain players are not available? We'll talk about it all on the show. Welcome in, Keith.
Yeah, this is gonna be a fun little show because, at 5 there could be so many different options, but at the same time, there's only so many different options. So a lot of it depends on what happens ahead of Seattle, but there's lots of
Yeah,
trades up and back that we can talk about. So
yeah,
yeah, where do you want to start?
fun show. Well, I think to set the stage, I, I think what we do is we just start at the beginning. Seattle acquired this pick from that Denver trade that worked out enormously well for the Seahawks. That was not the anticipation. The anticipation when the season started in 2022 was this is going to be Seattle's native pick. We were going to be in a top 5 scenario. Geno Smith has proven that he's not going to be the quarterback for the team. We're going to struggle all year. We're going to be competitive in games because the roster wasn't horrible, but we're going to lose most of them because we didn't have a quarterback to go win a game at the end. And it turned out we won 9 games. Denver was the team that struggled. Russell Wilson never found his footing there. And Seattle ended up with the top 5 pick. Now
Well,
you fast.
he found his footing in freaking week 18, and Seattle dropped from the 3rd pick to the 5th pick, which is
Yeah.
really
Well,
annoying that
other teams didn't do their jobs.
he waited until the last week of the season to screw over Seattle a little bit.
That's funny.
Um, but yeah, overall, Seattle has a top 5 pick, and they haven't had a top 5 pick in a long
In a
time.
long time. And Pete and John have both come out and said, hey, this doesn't happen very often. We're going to take advantage. And what does that mean? I think, to kind of frame the conversation more is we need to kind of find out what other teams are planning on doing that are in front of us.
Hmm.
Or if there's any other team that may want to get in front of us or get in front of another team that may need a quarterback and so forth. There's 3, possibly 4 quarterbacks that teams would be interested in at the top of this draft. We know that Carolina moved up originally. Chicago was sitting there. Carolina
Hmm.
was at 9. They moved all the way up to Chicago's pick to get a quarterback. And the consensus, I think you and I disagree on this, but I think the consensus since the beginning was that they wanted Bryce Young. I think that is still the case personally. You think it might be CJ Stroud. I think in
I
the
think
end,
it's
it
CJ
might not
Stroud.
matter.
It doesn't.
They're going to go 1, 2, or 2, 1.
Yeah.
I think, they're the first 2
Hmm.
quarterbacks off the board.
They're the first 2
Houston,
picks in this draft,
yeah. And Houston is sitting there at 2. They're also needing a quarterback. They have Davis Mills currently. Um,
which means they
so,
don't have a quarterback.
right.
So,
So,
yeah, I think it comes down to it doesn't matter as far as Seattle is concerned. Which one? I think Houston, and maybe it's the fact that Houston wants Bryce Young, and so that's what I'm hearing is that is Bryce Young to Houston, which means C.J. Stroud to Carolina, and maybe that's coming from Houston, hoping that they can say it enough that it happens. But you're probably right. It's probably the other way around where Carolina moved up to get Young, who's got the better tape and just he looks like um, maybe second coming of a Peyton Manning type, except for the fact that he's 6 inches shorter and 40 pounds lighter. And that's the problem. If he wasn't 6 inches shorter and 40 pounds lighter than a Peyton Manning, then um, nobody would question him going number one. No one at all. His tape's that
Agreed.
good.
Yeah,
But those two
his
guys are
20
not going to be available for Seattle.
his 2021 season was legit. I mean,
It was
it was
phenomenal.
huge. Um, so I think that is correct. There could be a wild card or two involved
Hmm.
in this process because there was two other quarterbacks that are top 10 talent. Anthony Richardson is sitting there. I think the consensus is now that he's going to probably go top 10. Will Levis is another prospect as well. There's
Hmm.
varying degrees of speculation as there is in this time of the year as we get very close to the draft, where Will Levis and Anthony Richardson are going to go, which teams value them. Is there enough value where teams will move up into the top five to get them, or does one of those prospects end up falling in this draft? I'm not sure. Maybe
I
Will
have a
Levis
hard time
does.
seeing what Levis drop below Indy. Um, and I have a hard time seeing Anthony Richardson drop below Vegas. And Indy's at 4, and Vegas is at 7. So I do think we're looking at 4 quarterbacks going in the top 7 because those two teams don't have a quarterback.
And you have Tennessee that's sitting out there at 11 currently, that also needs a quarterback.
Yeah, and
And there's been some speculation that they possibly would move up. Let's talk about Arizona at
mhm.
3 for a minute because there's the wild card as far as a team is concerned, not a player specific. Obviously, I think if they stayed, the consensus is that Will Anderson would be the pick,
Yeah,
the edge rusher,
they need
and
defensive help, and they have a quarterback with a massive contract that they can't move for a couple of years just because it would they would have to completely gut the entire roster to make up for the cap hit that would take for if they dropped Kyler Murray. So they're stuck with them. They're gonna see what they can get out of him, but between now and when his contract becomes unloadable. Um, but they need defensive help badly, and to get a guy like Will Anderson, who's just a made for prime time pass rusher, would be huge for them. And if anybody's mocking someone else to Arizona, I would just kind of question the thought process because it just makes way too much sense.
well, I'm I've seen too much in my time following the draft to lock him into that spot with 100% certainty. There are other players that I think. Here's the deal with Arizona: they have a lot of need,
They do.
not just one spot. I think that if I would highly consider if I was their general manager to drop back. Say if it was Las Vegas, I would feel better about it. Even a drop back of a couple with Seattle, if you could get premium picks out of Seattle for that, I might consider dropping back and still allow myself to get one of the top two defensive players in this draft, potentially while also picking up some value. And if it's Tennessee that wants to come up and you have to drop from 3 to 11, you're going to get a haul, probably some future draft picks, draft capitals, maybe a first in 2024, the 11 pick overall, probably a couple of seconds or a second, third out of this. It's going to be pretty valuable. And with as
Mhm.
many needs as they have, you could add a real nice draft haul
Oh,
to help
absolutely.
start to rebuild your. So I would consider that.
If
Now,
I
as
was
far as,
Arizona, that's what I would do. I'm just saying that if they stay at 3,
yeah.
who else is it gonna be?
Well, there's some that like Tyree Wilson better than Will Anderson. Now I know as far as tape is concerned and player and as far as the prospect and the leadership qualities that he brings and all of that, I agree. Will Anderson seems to be the logical pick. I'm just saying we're dealing with Arizona here, a new general manager. Devin
That's fair.
Witherspoon has been talked about as far as um, being the first corner off the board now over Gonzalez just because of the physical nature and the way he plays. Byron Jones, I believe, left Arizona this last season, so there's some need there. Um, you know, I'm just saying maybe they're fall in love with Jalen Carter, and Jalen Carter shocks and moves up a couple spots and gets picked there. which would leave Will Anderson to Seattle. So that would be an interesting thing.
Mhm.
Or you have a team like Vegas or like Tennessee that comes up and needs a quarterback, and four quarterbacks go in the first four picks, and Seattle has then its choice of the best defensive player on this board. That's also a possibility, and that's kind of
Absolutely.
the conversation that we're trying to
Yeah.
build around here is what does Seattle do at 5, depending on which scenario plays out, and we can run a couple of scenarios. Let's say Carolina goes quarterback, Houston goes quarterback, Arizona stays and chooses Will Anderson, Indianapolis chooses a quarterback. And if it's Will Levis, then you've got Anthony Richardson and Jalen Carter on the board at 5 when Seattle picks. Which direction do they go?
So, oh yeah, which direction? Um, Pete Carroll and John Snyder came out and said, "You're only here once every 15 years, if you're Seattle. Now, if you're Houston, you're here every year. But if you're here, if you're Seattle, you're only here once every 15 years. You have an opportunity to get a generational quarterback. It's the only way that you're going to get a generational quarterback is if you take the opportunity when you have it to take one. I think they go Anthony Richardson there, um, knowing that they can sit him for a year, fix his mechanics, fix his footwork, um, and they've got Geno Smith, who after this year is a tradable contract, and then move on to Richardson in a year. But it comes down to is that their? I mean, they say it's their thought process, but do they look at a guy like Jalen Carter and they go, "Damn, this is a guy who's unblockable. We need a defensive line upgrade, and this is a massive one."
Yes,
Um,
generational talent on the defensive line.
yeah. So it comes down to if Jalen Carter hadn't had the off-field issues, um, in the last month and a half, Jalen Carter's probably that pick because it's Pete Carroll and he loves defense. Um, but now you're choosing between two different guys that you're both have a chance to draft once ever, and one of them's got off-field issues and one of them doesn't. You take the one that doesn't, and I think they take Richardson there, given that scenario.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. 75% of me would agree with that. Yeah, and maybe they're the ones that have looked into this quarterback class and obviously out front doing it. And maybe Anthony Richardson's not the guy. Maybe they were after Will Levis. Will Levis goes into Indianapolis. They allow Anthony Richardson to go. Maybe Jalen Carter's not on their board, or they'd prefer to have Jalen Carter further down in the draft. But they're forced to make the pick. They're not able to drop back. Is there any other prospects that Seattle would choose at 5 that either would make you satisfied or would disappoint you?
At 5, this draft doesn't line up well for Seattle outside of the top 4 quarterbacks, Jalen Carter and, Will
Will
Anderson.
Anderson.
So there's 6 players, Seattle picks at 5. Um, if for some reason it works out that they've taken Carter off the board, that gives them 5 players in the top 5, they should get 1. But if they've picked a guy, whether it be Bryce Young or Will Levis, and they said, "Yeah, no thanks," on them for some reason, now there's 4 players, and they pick 5th. Um, after that, there's a huge gap before there's a player that I think Seattle would be like, "Ooh, we have to have that guy."
Mm,
Um, and if they can't move back in that scenario, and they're forced to pick a player, I think everyone's gonna end up being surprised and a little disappointed when it's somebody like Nolan Smith, the edge out of Georgia, who a lot of people are thinking, "Oh, that'll be a great pick at 20," and they end
yes.
up taking him at 5 because
It'd be a similar shock as Bruce Irvin was when he was drafted.
yeah, but he was taken at 12.
Yes, or
Um,
15, I think.
oh yeah, so they had the 12th pick, they traded back to 15. But the truth is that that was actually that that was a good pick. Other teams wanted him in the first round, and that's just where Seattle ended up. So, and I think that a guy like Nolan Smith would kind of be similar. It would be a shock because, wow, is he really a top 5 pick? You know what? Probably not. If you look at, comparatively to other draft classes, but they don't need a offensive tackle, and I do not believe they're in the market for a cornerback at the top of the draft, no matter how much I like Joey Porter Jr. and Christian Gonzalez, or even Devin Witherspoon. Like there's some nice, really nice players,
Yes.
but they're not
How
offensive
about
tackle and cornerback are just
let's
guys
talk
I don't
about
expect them taking.
Tyree Wilson. You know, there's over and over and over again, you know, from draft experts at NFL.com and ESPN and others. Tyree Wilson's the guy. You know, at 5, he's projected to be a top 10. He's been projected in this top 10 class for the duration of the time that we've been looking at prospects this
Mhm.
season, Keith. Yet we have a hard time envisioning him being a top 5 talent in this draft because after generational talent in um, Will Anderson and Jalen Carter, Tyree Wilson seems like a letdown. But is he? Is he a letdown, or does he have the potential to be end up being one of the best defensive players out of this class? And Seattle would gladly take him at 5. I've heard that he's a good fit. He's a good player. It would be logical. It wouldn't be a horrible pick. And if they're forced to make that pick, they would run up to the table with the card.
See, I don't know. He doesn't fit. He is a 4-3 defensive end. He's not a 3-4 defensive end, and he's not a 3-4 outside linebacker. He ends up in Seattle, um, the way Daryl Taylor fits in Seattle's defense right now. Daryl Taylor just is a guy without a position that they use as they finally figured out how to use him at the in at near the end, but it was as a situational pass rusher. He would come in when you knew the other team was throwing no matter what and just let him attack because he wasn't able to do the other things that you want him to do because he's a guy that needs to have his hand on the ground. Um, he's a 4-3 player, and they're trying to find a role for him in a 3-4. And if you look at Tyree Wilson, I see the same guy. I see a guy that um, will be being asked to play out of position because there isn't a position for him um, in a 3-4 defense.
I think that, you're right in that if you take a look at him as a 3-4 outside linebacker, the guy is 6'6", 271, which is a tweener for what you want as a
Mhm.
prospect. You either want a guy that's going to be faster because he ran a 4.8,
That's the other part
4.84,
of
or
it.
something like that,
So
4.84.
he's not an outside linebacker
He's
in a
not a
3-4.
speed. He's not a burner.
He's
He's
not an
not a
outside
twitchy
linebacker.
player at all. He's more of a physical
Yep.
edge, uh,
So you're gonna
uh,
if you draft
defending
him,
the
you're
edge kind of a
drafting
guy,
him to be a
a base
defensive
defensive
end,
end.
a base defensive end, and he at 271 is limited to being the 5 tech side,
He's got a frame that you can add to, but then you're gonna make him even slower. He
and
does
he's
have that
already slow.
84.5-inch wingspan, which is nuts.
Absolutely. His
Um,
arm length of 35 and 5/8 to go with his
yes,
6'6" height. The guy is a big guy.
yeah,
And maybe they take him in that role. They draft
and
him
that
to be a
LJ
defensive
Collier
end.
role, essentially, or currently last year it was Shelby Harris.
Yeah, but
And
this
you,
year it's
yes,
Dre Jones.
yes,
Um, and they just signed a guy to a massive contract to
right,
be that guy. So now you're drafting a backup at 5.
yeah, I get it.
He
A
just
rotation guy, obviously.
he
Does he
doesn't
make your defense better, Keith?
he does, but you're still drafting a guy that lacks scheme versatility and therefore um is limited. He's gotta play on he's either gonna be a rotational guy or he's gotta play on if he's gonna start, it's gotta be on the 5 tech side of the line. and that spot's already occupied. They've already
So
got a guy with that athletic profile.
let's stay at 5. Seattle picks at 5. Let's stay at that conversation for just a few more minutes. Is there another player currently in your big board, top 20 that would shock the world if Seattle stayed at 5 and made a pick? And what would it be?
No
Kalijah would
one's
Kalijah Cansey by any chance, or maybe
that would be
Peter
interesting.
Skoronski if they decided he's the best prospect on the board and
No,
they
they won't.
intend to move him inside to guard.
You don't
How
take a
about a
guard.
wide
You don't
receiver?
take a guard at 5. The only wide receiver that I see in this draft that's worthy of a pick that high is going to be Quentin Johnson, and that's a guy that you move back for, because people are going to look at Jackson Smith, Najigba, and maybe even Jordan Addison as being better prospects, but they're more slot guys. Whereas if you're drafting in the top 5, you want an outside receiver. You want someone who's gonna come in and dominate games. And the one guy in this, draft class that has the height, weight, speed combination to do that is going to be, Quentin Johnson, the wide receiver out of TCU. So I could see him going if they had to take a pick and there was, you know, it just didn't work out with a lot of different things. I would say more likely might be Miles Murphy, the edge out of Clemson, or the Lucas Van Ness, the edge out of Iowa. Um, if they're gonna shock the world, Kalijah Cansey might be, or a guy that you like, but it would hard to believe that he would be drafted that high would be Mozzie Smith, um,
Mhm.
the nose tackle slash freaky
Mhm.
athlete, um, out of Michigan. Now a lot of people are thinking of him as like late round 1, early round 2. So to take him at 5 would leave a lot of people shaking their head. But if five's a hard spot, if they end up where for some reason they just have taken Jalen Carter off their board because of the off field stuff, and they're not enamored with whatever cornerback is left. Um, they're in a hard spot because there's a big drop off after those 6 guys before you get to the next guy that Seattle would want, in my opinion, at least.
I got just before we talk about moving back. Let's just say Seattle's at 5. They're enamored with one of the quarterbacks, or maybe it's Will Anderson. They feel like Will Anderson's generational for them. They need to have him in their defense. Are there a scenario where let's just say it's either Anthony Richardson or it's CJ Stroud that Seattle feels like that's their quarterback of the future? We're not going to take any chances. We've got the draft capital. We've got a team, let's just say it's Houston, that is willing to move back with us. uh A, is this in the realm of possibility? And B, draft capital wise, what would it take to move up from 5 to 2 overall to get the
Um,
quarterback that you want to leave this draft with?
Well, I don't think Houston would move back because they're desperate for a quarterback and they're in a position to get one. I think they're set at staying at 2 and taking either Young or Stroud, whichever one Carolina doesn't take. Um, but sure, let's say that, or maybe Arizona, because Arizona at 3 is they are desperate. They need a lot on their defense, so maybe they do want to move back. Unfortunately, what you're looking at if you're going to move up, teams are going to ask for pick 5 and pick 20, and maybe like a second round pick or a second round pick in a year or a third round pick in something like that. They're going to ask for both of Seattle's first round picks this year.
Yeah,
And are you are you
it'd be
willing to
worth
give that up?
it'd be worth it. So for me, it would be worth it, because you're getting your quarterback that you believe strongly enough in to do that. And I think
Yeah.
if it were John Schneider, and I think he's pretty good at evaluating quarterbacks, if he thought that Anthony Richardson, given a year of development in their system, was ready to go in 2024, that he would go up and do that deal, and I don't think he would think twice about it, given the value that I think that would bring. I think that that 20th pick in the long run scheme of things is nothing to go up and get your franchise guy. So yeah, I would do that.
Yeah, I could see it. If you were Arizona, do you trade with a division rival and give them their quarterback of the future?
That's a very interesting question, and I
Do you
don't
take slightly
necessarily.
less to trade with, Vegas
I think you could
and
do
give
two
them
deals.
there?
I think if you trade with Arizona, you're not done. As if you're Arizona. I think if Arizona trades with Seattle, I think they end up trading twice, because they end up at 5, and potentially Will Anderson's still there because 4 quarterbacks would go off the board unless Indiana completely changed course because one of the quarterback they wanted is gone. Um, I think that if you're Arizona, you drop back to 5, you still get the guy you want. If for some reason, though, you've got a quarterback that gets past Indianapolis and Tennessee wants that Arizona would have a chance to even pick up more capital.
Mhm,
So, from what I understand and what's going on right now is that Arizona's open for business as far as trading out of this pick, and they've got at least 6 teams, uh, that's been reported,
mhm.
that are, interested in the pick, and they're gonna have a bidding war. And so we'll see how this goes.
If
I would
if you
imagine
were
based on everything we know about John Schneider and Pete Carroll, they're in on that deal.
Mhm,
They're as part of that conversation. I'm not saying they're going to do it. They're just part of it. They understand it. They know what's going on. They've got to be part of this conversation, because it affects them. And so whether or not they do the deal, that remains to be seen. But they're in this conversation. I don't know exactly what it would take to get in front of Tennessee. If you were Arizona, you control more of the draft if you only drop back 2 spots. If you drop back to Tennessee at 11, you've you're rewriting your entire draft process. Now your draft capital that you've got to make that move is substantial,
mhm.
but you've lost out now on the top 10 picks.
But if you again, if you, like, you look at maybe not, uh, Tennessee at 11, but, Vegas at
Vegas.
7, right? So now you're only moving back 4 spots, you're moving back to 7, um, and you have a chance to get a Christian Gonzalez or, maybe
Mm,
Jalen Carter continues to drop and you can grab him there. Um,
yes.
and you don't have to give your division rival their quarterback of the future. Don't you take that first? Don't you move back to Vegas instead of moving back to
There's still an opportunity for Seattle to get, the quarterback that they want at 5 if, Vegas comes up and they want Will Levis. And then Indianapolis is left with Anthony Carter. They don't wanna draft Anthony Richardson, sorry. They don't wanna draft Richardson because he's not ready, and so they pass on him and draft, Jalen
Mhm.
Carter or Witherspoon or somebody else there, and Seattle still has an opportunity to draft Richardson. I mean, that could play out as well. To me, it's fascinating.
I could this would be incredibly unpopular in Arizona. It would they would, like, march in the streets if it happened, but I could see Arizona drafting Anthony Richardson because, uh, Kyler Murray has a difficult time staying healthy and is known for being extremely immature,
Won't be ready this fall.
and so now you've got a quarterback that you can maybe get a little bit of playing time to at the, first couple weeks, and then, you sit him down because your quote unquote starter comes back, and plays for most of the season, and then you get him in at the end of the year, and you go from having a tiny athletic quarterback that gets hurt a lot to a ginormous uber athletic quarterback, that you think is the guy forever. Um, and then you worry about how to get out from underneath that, Kyler Murray contract a year from now.
Yeah.
Um,
And
I could
They've
actually
got
see that
Colt
happening.
McCoy on the roster as well. So
Sure they do. Uh,
Yeah, well,
yes,
you know
is
what I mean, but
let's
Colt would
let's not
probably
a
get those starts at the beginning of the season.
let's not draft a generational quarterback or a potential one,
No, I'm not saying
um,
that.
because you got Colt McCoy.
Yeah, no, 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 I'm not saying that. I'm just saying Colt would probably get those starts at the
He
beginning of
probably
the
would,
year.
yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that would be a strategy. I don't think you can get out from under. They might be able to trade Kyler Murray, but I don't know if he's an asset that you can trade. He's
No, no one's gonna take on that contract given his
that's a
injuries.
exactly and his immaturity issues and so forth.
Yep.
They might be stuck, Keith. I don't know that they can do that deal, but
Yeah, I don't know.
we'd
I would
see.
have to look at his contract a little closer. I was thinking that, they're 2 years. They need to hold on to Murray for 2 years, in order to get out from underneath that contract.
Okay, so
But
let's
it's
talk. Let's
yeah,
let's let's go back to the Seahawks. Okay, so moving up doesn't seem likely just
it
because
doesn't.
we lack trade partners and the way that the draft is going to fall. Seattle still has a great opportunity at 5 to get a player, but let's just say worst case scenario, Seattle, uh, CJ Stroud isn't there. They don't like Bryce Young as a prospect for some reason. Anderson's gone, Richardson's gone, and they've passed on Carter. They've taken him off their board. Worst case scenario now, your best players on the board are going to be Bryce Young, Gonzalez, Tyree Wilson, and Witherspoon, let's say.
Mhm.
Um,
At
they
that
want to desperately drop back. What
yeah,
are the
and
scenarios where that happens and what do we get out of it? And maybe, let's talk about prospects
well,
in the range.
there is a quarterback that is viewed as the number 1 overall prospect in Bryce Young, sitting there, and you've got 2 incredibly quarterback needy teams behind you that are salivating because a guy that they might have number 1 on their board is still available. So you can move back from 5 to 7 with Vegas and get a second round pick and let them have tiny fragile quarterback and get another pick in the top 50. Um, or you tell Vegas, "Hey, we're gonna, if you don't do that, we're gonna go to Tennessee down to 11," and you drop down to 11, and you get
Right.
a second and a third.
So you try to
Um,
get the 38th pick overall from Las Vegas for moving up 2 spots. That's a premium. That's a little bit more than is required normally, but you're going up for a quarterback. You're
you're going
going
up for a
coming up
quarterback,
to 5,
and there's another team that wants that same quarterback.
right? So they may desperately try to get that and give Seattle that
Mhm.
38th overall pick to move back 2
I think
spots.
Vegas becomes a good trading partner, um, for Seattle just because of the need for a quarterback. Um, and I mean, yeah, you have,
And
uh
potentially Jalen Carter maybe is not off their board. Maybe they would take him at 7 as opposed to 5 with the extra
mhm.
draft capital they just acquired. Or there's a potentially another team that would want Jalen Carter or another, one of the top corners in the draft or Tyree Wilson that would come up at 7 and Seattle could drop back yet again.
Yeah. I mean, and the other team, if Vegas balks it at the overall, like, cost of moving up just 2 spots and they hadn't anticipated a quarterback being dropping down, so they don't have like, they have an entire draft strategy ready that doesn't involve that. Um, Atlanta is a potential, trade partner as well at 8, so you're only moving back 1 more spot, there. So you have Vegas, you have Atlanta, you have Tennessee, that's 7, 8, and 11. You have 3 potential, spots where they could move up and get, a
Yeah.
quarterback for you.
If Atlanta was the team, Atlanta has picked 44 overall in the second
Mhm,
round. That is pretty much on value to move up from where they're at to where Seattle's at, 8th to 5th.
mhm.
However, with the premium there, you could probably extract another 4th round pick or maybe a future third to be able to do
Mhm.
that.
Another team that would you wouldn't wanna trade with because you don't wanna drop back that far. But a team that needs a quarterback is Washington, the Commanders. They're at 16. So
That's a pretty big move.
that is a huge move. That's dropping 11 spots. If they're coming up there, you're looking at getting, um, 16, you're looking at getting their second round pick, and you're looking at next year's first round pick.
Yes, that would be a move that would dictate future first plus second,
Uh-huh.
third, fourth this year, maybe 3 picks out of this draft and a future first.
Yeah, one, 2, 4 in this, and then first round next year. Um, and so then you'd have 2 first round picks again next year. Um,
Yes. And with a with a, you know,
there's a
first
good quarterback
round
draft class coming through next year.
type of draft pick available. So
Yeah.
talked about the draft. What is the likely way that this plays out? Obviously, I think the most likely is Seattle stays at 5, makes a pick. What do you think is going to happen, Keith?
I think the most likely scenario depends on what Indy does. If Indy takes Richardson, I think they move back to, and if Richardson's there at 5, I think they take their quarterback. And I just see it. I'm
There
not
is a
enamored.
scenario where somebody comes up with for Arizona's pick. It's not Seattle. There's 4 quarterbacks gone in the first 4 picks, and Will Anderson's there at 5, and they take Anderson. To me,
Yeah,
that's the other option.
if it's not, I don't know. I yes, but I'm not sure if they take Anderson, or if Anderson, you look at that and you go, this is the best defensive player in this entire draft. Uh, you have teams like the Lions that need defense desperately. Um, that maybe you can extract a pick just to move up one spot, so um, they get Anderson instead of Seattle, and then you can do something from there,
Yeah.
or maybe you
Or
look.
Chicago comes back up.
Yeah, Chicago needs help, but I think
Mhm.
Chicago goes offense, and they go wide receiver or offensive line to help out their young quarterback. But the Eagles at 10 could be a trade partner where they're like, we've lost a lot of defensive talent off this team. We need to come up and get a guy,
Yes.
um, like a Will Anderson, and so you if the quarterbacks go, that means the best defensive players are available. Also, quarterbacks, I mean, as far as like big board, right? The quarterbacks get pushed up because they're so rare. But as far as actual evaluation of talent, the quarterbacks that go at the top of the draft, they're the most valuable, but they're not necessarily the most like
The
talented,
best football players.
the best football players. And so you're looking at getting the best football players if you're at 5 and quarterbacks go 1 through 4. Um, and so there's value there for everybody. And maybe that's a situation where Seattle can move back, you know, get a bunch of draft capital, push some stuff into next year, and still get impactful players.
Yes.
Um, whether it be Lucas Van Ness or Nolan Smith, or
Yeah.
any of these guys.
Or a
Um,
corner. I'll just say a corner. Seattle hasn't had a corner drafted earlier than round 3
mhm.
during this reign. This is their 13th draft together, believe it or not. Um, but there, it's a position of value in the draft. One of the positions that you'd like to see teams use high draft picks on: wide receiver, offensive tackle, defensive line, quarterback, and then wide receiver, or excuse me, and then corner.
Yeah. I mean,
And so you could have a
those are the positions of value. The thing is, Seattle doesn't value corners in the same way, which is why they've never drafted one before the third. And the only reason they drafted one in the third that year, um, was because they were semi desperate. They needed a day one starter. Otherwise, I think they would have waited till the fourth or the fifth in
well,
that
we've
year as well.
drafted a corner, we've drafted a safety in the first, so it wouldn't rule out drafting a corner.
Yeah. Earl Thomas was also
Elite.
an
I get
all-time great
I get
elite
that.
prospect.
I get that. That's fun. I just, this whole process is fun. I agree with your Nolan Smith thing at the top when we started this conversation. What would be the player that they might choose to draft if their initial big board goes awry, where they've got a quarterback there that they don't like, and what's his name, Will Levis, and they don't like Tyree Wilson. They'd rather have Nolan Smith. They believe that he would fit better in their defense, and so that would be the pick. To me, I wouldn't be shocked. I
Is
would not
there
be shocked.
is there a player that if they took them at 5, you would be upset?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say probably one of the tackles. Broderick Jones comes to mind, it- or a
Paris
player like Brian
Johnson.
Branch, for example, who, while is a great player and has some scheme diversity, would does that tip the scales for me at 5? No, I don't think so. Or a Michael Mayer, or even if it's beyond Bijan Robinson, it would freak me out to take a running back at 5.
Yeah, see, that's
Whereas I
that
think we could drop back, but if you don't have a
Bijan
trade
Robinson is the
partner,
guy that dictated that question,
yeah. Yeah,
because
that
it's
would just freak me out. It'd just be wrong
that's
on
an
so many
absolute
levels. I would love the
waste,
player. I would hate the pick
absolute
because,
waste of
yeah,
the immense draft capital that is the 5th
yes,
overall pick in the
you've got an
draft.
opportunity here, in once in a generation opportunity for Seattle, and then you go and do something like that. Now, would that completely shock me from this regime? No, but it would be a bad pick, and you're right, a wasted pick, wasted opportunity, etc. I would rather have Smith Najigba, even though he's a lesser football player. He's just a better pick in that spot.
Mhm.
Devin Witherspoon is a better pick, I think, than Bijan Robinson, because not a better football player, but he does more. He has more impact on the
Mhm.
team long term, I believe. Bijan Robinson, he could be, one hit wonder or out of the league in 5 years. Running backs get hurt. Their positional value, I think, goes down over time, and I
I
wouldn't be
mean,
sold on that at all.
the Ezekiel Elliott pick by Dallas didn't work. Um, in New York with, of course, we've been doing this now for almost 2 hours. And, but yeah, in the Giants used their pick, and they had to wait 3 years because of injuries before they finally got a noticeable return on that. And even
Hmm.
then, now you've been waiting 3 years, and the quarter or the running back's getting to an age where they're gonna start declining. Like, first round running backs, their talent, and I can see teams being enamored with it, but the impact that they have on a game, and on a season is less than players at other positions, because the difference between, in talent between an Ezekiel Elliott and whoever his backup has been over the course of this. I mean, there's been multiple, but Pollard is the guy now. Um, at last year, Pollard was the better player, and it's only been
Hmm.
4 years. So
Right.
you've got a situation where running backs in the first round just don't make a lot of sense. And I hope that Seattle learned that lesson with Penny.
I think, the one thing too, if they're enamored with Jalen Carter, but Jalen Carter's off their board and they want to try to get that player, Cansey could be a player that they would overdraft.
Yep, Elijah
Brian
Kancey would be
Breesy
one.
would be
Mhm.
another player that they would value, but reach for. Uh, these things would be unfortunate, but I would understand that they were trying to make the best possible value pick if they got stuck, and I just hope that doesn't happen, but it is possible.
Another
Um,
pick that if they made it 5, I would shake my head at and be very disappointed would be Hendon Hooker, the quarterback out of Tennessee.
Me too.
Um, and people have talked about him going number 5 to Seattle. Um, but he's 25 now. He'll be 26 before next season, but he won't play next season. So he'll be 27 before he has a chance to get on the football field for Seattle. That's a terrible way to, um, you know, get a quarterback in there and it's just you never want to draft older prospects, and he's even older than that. And on
Lem
top of that, he was playing in an offense that doesn't translate necessarily into Seattle's offense, where
I would
everyone was wide open.
one of the picks that I would say would shock the world, even if they drop back, say from 5 to 7, would be a guy like Ade Ade. I know that they like him. He's part of their 30 visits. He's got some athletic profiles and athletic traits that I think elevate him as a prospect. He's currently valued in the second round. I wouldn't mind the pick at 20 or 24 or whatever. But
Hmm.
but this seems like the kind of thing that Seattle would do. 6'2", 282, but his athletic profile is off the charts. He's long armed, even though he's 6'2", weighs 282 pounds. So scheme fit wise, he's a guy that could be scheme diverse for you.
Yeah, because he could be
B-
on the 3 or the 5 side. And he's a guy that's
Exactly.
going to come up, and he's at times just unblockable.
And ran
On
a
his college tape.
4.49, ran
Yeah,
a 4.49 at 282 pounds, and
that's
he looked the
crazy.
part at at the combine. So,
Yep.
and the Senior Bowl, he just kind of knocked it out of the park. Was beating everybody out on the line and so forth. He's, to me, this guy has a way more scheme fit and upside than Tyree Wilson,
Yeah, I
and
mean, that's the thing is, I don't
that's for
necessarily I don't
those
dislike Tyree Wilson, I just dislike
reasons
him in Seattle's
that
defense.
this pick. Yeah, sorry, we had a little bit of technical difficulty there, so hopefully we were recording that. I
Yeah.
think we were. So anyway, I think let's get out of this show.
Mhm.
Good conversation. I think it's fascinating. I think we're going to come back with our next show next week, and we'll look at the 20th pick overall and kind of do the same thing, run through the same scenarios. Seattle has a great opportunity in this draft with 5 picks in the top 100. There are scenarios if you can drop back to pick up even further capital in the top 100. This would be a great draft to do that. I think just because there are so many needs and the depth on the Seahawks really needs to be addressed. To get
Mhm.
an opportunity to do that would be something else. But you really that number 5 pick overall is a unique opportunity if the draft falls right. It really does help. I'll be just honest, just nuts and bolts wise. It helps if Jalen Carter's not off the board because I do believe if he would be the pick, things fall really nice for Seattle from that 5th pick. You're addressing need, but you're also addressing one of the best players in the draft. Um, I just don't know that that's going to happen. I think the same thing can be said for Anthony Richardson. If Richardson's the guy, if Pete and John have gone through that evaluation process, he's the pick. He's there at 5. I think they make that pick.
Yeah.
So it's just it's fascinating to me. But there's a lot of
The Seahawks
scenarios
need
that I
this
run where
team
those
needs
guys are not
defensive line
there.
help. The Seahawks need
Yeah.
defensive line help, and if they go Richardson instead of Carter at 5, now you're in a situation, and this is gonna come in on the next show, where you are, um, looking at 3 or 4 guys that you're
Yes.
hoping is available to you at 20,
Yes.
because otherwise, taking that quarterback hurt you in this next year because you weren't able to address your biggest need.
And in addition to that, Keith, they need a little bit of trench help on the other side of the ball. So there are scenarios where you go a Richardson at 5 and at 20 with either at 20 or a short drop back. You're taking a look at prospects like Schmitz, or
Or
if a
Osiris
guy,
Torrance.
or Torrance, or if a guy falls like oh, what's the one guy? Skaronski. If Skaronski
Mhm.
falls because he's projected to be a guard, and so that value drops him a little bit, then you and he's available at 20, and Seattle's like, we're going to pounce on that. Um, it- so it becomes very or you start reaching. You get guys like Mozzie Smith, you plug in right away, or Kalijah Cansey maybe doesn't isn't the prospect that you valued as much as other teams do, and you kind of overdraft him a little bit. It becomes very interesting to me. Yeah, cool.
Yep.
All right, let's get out of here. Find Keith on Twitter at Myers NFL. You can find me at NW Seahawk. Subscribe to the show on any of your podcast platforms, Seahawks Playbook Podcast, as well as on YouTube. We've got our own channel. Check that out and share it if you like it. So until next time, go Hawks.
Seahawks Playbook Podcast listeners, thanks for joining us for another edition of the show. You can find us on Twitter. Bill is at NW Seahawk, Keith is at Myers NFL, and the show is at Hawks Playbook. You can listen and subscribe to the show at SeahawksPlaybook.com.